Most people don't have a money problem. They have a clarity problem. They don't know what's coming in. They have a rough sense of what's going out. And somewhere in the middle, there's this gap that just keeps showing up no matter how many times they promise themselves this month will be different. And the really brutal part is that the gap doesn't care how smart you are. It doesn't care that you have a degree or a decent job, or that you've bought 3 personal finance books that are now collecting dust on your nightstand next to a highlighter you used twice. The truth is that the version of your financial life you actually want isn't years away. For most people, it's about 90 days. Not because 90 days is some magic number, because 90 days is long enough to actually change your behavior, but short enough that you can see the finish line without losing motivation. That's the window. Use it wrong, and you're back on the same carousel in January. Use it right, and by the time those 90 days are up, the whole thing runs differently. My name is Mike, and I have spent a lot of time thinking about why some people radically change their financial lives in a short period, while others make the same promises to themselves every single year without anything actually shifting. Today, I want to walk you through exactly what 90 days of intentional financial work looks like, what it produces, and what you have to do first before anything else makes sense. Let's start with the first thing, and it's the thing nobody wants to do because it forces you to be honest with yourself in a way that's genuinely uncomfortable. Before you can fix anything, you have to know what you're actually dealing with. Not a rough approximation. Not the version in your head where you sort of know what you spend on rent and figure everything else probably works out fine. The actual numbers. Here's a scenario. You're a single person making $60,000 a year. After taxes, Social Security, and Medicare, you're probably taking home somewhere around $3,800 to $4,000 a month, give or take, depending on your state. That's the starting point. Now, most people could not, right now, tell you what they spent last month on food, or transportation, or the pile of subscriptions that have been quietly billing them since 2021. They know their big number, rent or mortgage, and after that, it's a fog. And living inside that fog is expensive. The first 30 days of this whole reset is about lighting the room. Pull up your bank statements, your credit card statements, 3 months of them. Sit with them. Go line by line. What you're looking for is the actual picture of your spending, not the picture you imagine when you think about your spending. These two things are almost never the same. The research on this is uncomfortable in a very specific way. The C+R study on subscription spending found that the average person thinks they spend about $86 a month on subscriptions. The actual number is 219. That's more than 2.5 times what people believe. There is $130 a month hiding in services people signed up for and stopped thinking about. On a monthly budget, that's not a rounding error. That's a flight somewhere. What you're doing in this first stretch is building a real picture. Fixed expenses, the things that hit whether you feel like it or not, rent, utilities, car payment, insurance. Variable necessities, groceries, gas, the pharmacy run. And then the discretionary layer, everything that's a choice. Restaurants, shopping, entertainment, the weekend decisions that add up to either nothing or a lot depending on how often you make them. Once you sort everything into those categories and total them up, one of two things happens. Either the numbers roughly match what you expected, which is rare, or you find something. Usually, you find something. Now, here's what most people do with that information. They feel bad about it for 4 days, decide they're going to track every single dollar going forward, and then stop tracking dollars by day 9 because it's tedious and they're tired after work. That cycle isn't your fault. It's just the wrong approach. You don't need to track every dollar forever. You need to run this audit once, understand the landscape, and then set the system up so the system does the work. Let me bring in someone to make this concrete. Call her Claire. She's 29, makes $58,000 a year, take home is about $3,700 a month. When she runs the audit in month 1, she finds she's spending $340 a month on food delivery and restaurants, which she thought was more like $150. She has 4 active streaming subscriptions, 2 of which she hasn't logged into since before a relationship ended. She's paying for a gym membership she uses twice a month at most. And her car insurance hasn't been shopped around since she set it up in 2019. None of this is catastrophic. All of it is fixable. The restaurant and delivery category alone, if she pulls that from $340 down to something closer to $160, frees up $180 a month. The subscriptions she cancels save another $60. The gym she drops and replaces with running outside saves $50. Shop the car insurance and she picks up another $70. That's $360 a month she just found without changing anything that meaningfully changes how her life feels. $360 a month is $4,320 a year. That's an emergency fund. That's the beginning of something real. And she didn't have to get a second job or stop going out entirely. She just had to look honestly at where the money was going and make a few decisions. Which brings us to automation. And this is genuinely the thing that separates people who make financial progress from people who intend to make financial progress. The difference between those two groups is almost never intelligence or discipline. It's whether they set up automatic transfers. That's it. That is actually the whole mechanic. Here's how it works. Say your take-home pay is $4,000 a month. You automate $300 to a high-yield savings account the day after payday. You automate another $300 into a brokerage account for investing. That $600 moves before your brain has a chance to make any decision about it. Before the new sneaker ad loads, before the dinner plan comes up, before the impulse even exists. The money is already gone in the best possible direction. You live on $3,400. You build on $600. Repeat 12 times. $600 a month at 8% annual returns, which is historically conservative for a diversified stock portfolio, gives you roughly $9,000 at the end of year one. Not because you're brilliant, because you set up 2 automatic transfers and left them alone. This is the system working. Everything else in personal finance is noise around this core mechanic. The specific fund you pick matters less than the fact that you actually pick one and keep buying it consistently. The high-yield savings piece deserves its own sentence. Online savings accounts right now are paying somewhere between 3.5% and 4.5% annually. The average traditional savings account at a big bank is paying around 0.5%, which means if you're keeping your emergency money in a regular savings account, you are quietly leaving hundreds of dollars a year on the table while the bank earns interest on your own discipline. Move it. It takes 20 minutes and the difference compounds every single month from that point forward. Now let's talk about the emergency fund, because this is the part most people either skip or undersize because it sounds obvious and boring and isn't as exciting as investing. But here's what 3 to 6 months of expenses in an accessible account actually buys you that an investment portfolio cannot. It buys you the ability to make decisions that are in your long-term interest instead of decisions that are purely survival. If your car breaks down and you have $4,000 sitting in a savings account, that's an annoying week. If your car breaks down and you have nothing, that's a credit card charge at 21% interest that you'll be paying for the next 8 months. The second scenario doesn't just cost you the repair. It costs you the repair plus all the interest, plus the psychological weight of knowing the debt is still there. The emergency fund isn't really about the emergency. It's about who you get to be after the emergency and what decisions you can make from a position of stability instead of desperation. The general target is 3 months of essential expenses as the floor, 6 months as the real cushion. For someone spending $2,000 a month on necessities, you're looking at $6,000 to $12,000 in an accessible account, not in your brokerage, not locked up in a certificate of deposit with an early withdrawal penalty. Just there, liquid, boring, doing exactly one job. The debt conversation sits right underneath all of this. The average American credit card balance is somewhere around $7,000. At an average interest rate above 21%, that balance is costing roughly $125 a month purely in interest. That's money going directly to the credit card company for the privilege of having borrowed money in the past. It's the most expensive recurring bill most people carry, and also the most invisible one because it doesn't come with a delivery or a service or anything you can point to. The approach for high-interest consumer debt isn't complicated. It just isn't comfortable. Pay the minimums on everything, then throw every available extra dollar at the highest interest rate balance first. When that one's gone, redirect everything to the next one. That's the debt avalanche. Mathematically, it's the fastest exit from the whole situation. Some people prefer the psychological win of knocking out the smallest balance first, and if that's what keeps you moving, fine. The behavioral outcome matters more than the theoretically optimal sequence. But the math strongly favors attacking the highest rate first. Here's the specific thing about debt that most people miss. Paying off a credit card charging 21% is a guaranteed 21% return on every dollar you put toward it. The stock market has historically returned somewhere around 8 to 10% annually, and that return is not guaranteed in any given year. So if you're carrying high-interest debt and simultaneously putting money into investments, you are mathematically moving backward in one pocket while the other one slowly fills. The sequence matters. Emergency fund floor first, high-interest debt next, then aggressive investing. Not because some finance personality decided that's the right order, because the math says so. Now, there's a second front to all of this that most financial resets completely ignore, and it's the most important variable in the whole equation. Cutting expenses is one side, earning more is the other. And unlike spending, which can only go to zero, income has no ceiling. You can only cut spending down to nothing. You can theoretically grow income indefinitely. Most people treat income as a fixed constant when it's actually one of the most actionable variables in their entire financial picture. If you've been at your current job for more than a year without a raise, that's the first conversation to have. Not at your next annual review, now. The research on negotiation is consistent on this point. People who ask for raises with a specific number and documented reasoning get them at a significantly higher rate than people who wait for the organization to decide on its own that they deserve more. Salaries don't self-correct. Labor markets are not that efficient when it comes to individual compensation at the company level. You are the advocate for the number in your paycheck, and if you don't make the case, nobody will. The worst outcome is a no that leaves you exactly where you started. The upside is a permanent change to your monthly math. Beyond the primary income, the side hustle is now a genuine middle-class reality, not a hustle culture fantasy. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported more than 9 million Americans working multiple jobs simultaneously in recent data, which is the highest raw number since they started tracking it. That's not just people who need the money. That's people who figured out that an extra $400 to $600 a month applied specifically toward a goal, not absorbed into general spending, is a real tool. Freelancing, consulting in an adjacent skill area, service-based work, any of it that fits your situation. $500 a month of incremental income over 12 months is $6,000. That's the credit card paid off. That's the brokerage account that started from somewhere other than zero. That's options that didn't exist before. Which brings us to investing, and specifically to the mistake most people make with it, which is waiting until they have the right amount to start, or the right knowledge, or the right moment in the market. None of those things matter as much as starting. A simple S&P 500 index fund, something tracking the 500 largest companies in the United States, has returned roughly 10% annually over the past century. That includes every recession, every market crash, every news cycle that felt like the definitive end of the world. The investors who came out ahead weren't the ones who predicted any of it. They were the ones who kept buying through all of it without flinching. If you're 30 years old and you start putting $200 a month into a broad market index fund at 8% average annual returns, you end up with roughly $330,000 by 65. If you wait until you're 40 to start that same $200 monthly contribution, you end up with around $130,000. The decade of delay doesn't cost you $100,000. It costs you $200,000. That's the compounding penalty for waiting. Every year you're not investing is a year the machine isn't running. Start where you are. $200, $100, even $50. Open an account at Fidelity or Vanguard, buy the Total Market Index Fund or the S&P 500 ETF, set up an automatic monthly purchase, and then let it go. Don't check it every week. Don't sell it when the market drops 30% and everyone in your office is talking about it. Don't try to optimize it with individual stock picks or quarterly rebalancing strategies. The optimal move is the boring one held for a very long time. The people who beat the market aren't the active traders. According to Dalbar's annual research, the average equity investor has consistently underperformed the S&P 500 by multiple percentage points every year for decades. They underperform not because they're bad at analysis, because they're human beings who make emotional decisions when the numbers on their screen make them feel bad. Here's what Claire's picture looks like at the end of 90 days. She's found $360 a month she didn't know she had. She's got $1,200 in a high-yield savings account earning actual interest. She set up automatic transfers, so $200 goes to savings and $200 goes to a brokerage account buying an index fund every single month without her having to think about it or feel virtuous about it. She's put an extra $160 toward her credit card balance every month, which, at her interest rate, cuts over a year off her payoff timeline. She asked her manager about a raise, gave them a specific number, and got half of what she asked for, which is still $4,000 more per year than she had before the conversation. And she has a written target for the next 12 months that tells her exactly how much she's trying to save and exactly where those dollars are going. None of that required a radical lifestyle overhaul. She still goes out, she still takes the occasional trip. She just stopped paying for the gym she didn't use and the streaming services she'd forgotten about, redirected the money with some intention, and asked one uncomfortable question that paid off. The system is running now. That's the whole shift. The last piece, and the one most people skip because it sounds like it should come at the beginning of a motivation seminar, is knowing specifically what you're working toward. Not in a vague, I want to be better with money way, in a here's the number way. If you want to buy a house in 5 years and you need an $80,000 down payment, that means $16,000 a year, which means about $1,330 a month into an account specifically for that. That's a number you can calculate against. That's a target you can automate toward. That's a quarterly check-in that either tells you you're on pace or tells you exactly how far off you are and why. Vague intentions don't compound. Specific numbers do. The people who end up in genuinely different financial situations in 5 years aren't the ones who cared more. They're the ones who knew exactly what they were building and structured their money around it before spending whatever was left. So here's what 90 days actually produces when you run it correctly. In the first 30 days, you have a clear, honest picture of your finances for the first time, probably ever. You found the waste you didn't know was there. You've automated a savings rate that happens whether or not you're feeling motivated. In the second 30 days, you've established an emergency fund floor, you have a debt payoff sequence in motion, and your money is moving in a direction that wasn't possible when you didn't know where it was going. In the third 30 days, you're invested. You started the income conversation. You have a specific written goal with a specific number attached. The machine is running. That's not financial independence, not in 90 days, but it's something genuinely more important than a number in any single account. It's the moment you stop being reactive to your money and start being intentional about it. And that shift is the whole game. Everything that comes after, the compounding, the net worth growth, the ability to make decisions based on what you actually want instead of what you owe, all of it flows from that moment. 90 days from now, you're going to be somewhere. The only question is whether that somewhere is the same place you're standing right now or somewhere you actually chose to go. Where are you going to be? Let us know in the comment section. I will be there, lurking.